is Washington Irving, who wrote a fanciful history of the Dutch colonizers of New York City. In fact, writing on behalf of the speakers of English who then occupied New York City, Irving had some pretty savage fun at the expense of the Dutch-speaking colonizers who'd had it before them. Irving made all kinds of outlandish claims about what the New Amsterdam Dutch used to do at Christmas time. He portrayed them as so besotted with the holiday that it's a miracle that any of the colony's business got done during November or December. And he set great store by their children's supposed fascination with a legendary character named Sinterklaas. Now, this was satire, but later generations took it all seriously and strove to restore some of these holiday traditions. It's rather as though centuries from now, archaeologists might find a trove of Daily Show episodes and use them to reconstruct a history of American military policy. This stuff didn't happen. It was a joke. And now nobody gets the joke. In other words, today's figure of Santa Claus did not develop out of a real tradition. It grew out of a misunderstood satire of a tradition, an ironic heritage, to say the least. Our second culprit was Charles Dickens. Now, you may think I'm going to go right to A Christmas Carol, but I'm going to start out a little bit earlier in his career. In his novel, The Pickwick Papers, Dickens described an old-fashioned English Christmas of a type that never really existed. Readers assumed that Dickens was drawing on memories of Christmas celebrations when he was a child. But Dickens was born in 1812. Nobody much in England was celebrating Christmas when Dickens was a child. Dickens never could have experienced that kind of traditional Christmas in his own youth. Instead, what Dickens did was he projected back onto an idealized past, a Christmas celebration such as was only then taking shape in his own day. And of course, Dickens himself was one of the primary agents in making that restoration occur. Well, a generation of writers and artists learned from this to package newly made holiday practices in false nostalgia, as though they were venerable at their birth. Now, of course, Dickens did also give us A Christmas Carol and Ebenezer Scrooge, whose example made anyone who dared to be less than enthusiastic about the holiday into a fitting target for public scorn. All told, Charles Dickens did more than any other human to dress Christmas in Victorian garb and bring the moribund festival back to life. Our third culprit was England's Queen Victoria. Like other monarchs in her line, Victoria married a German prince. Prince Albert of the House of Hanover brought with him the Christmas tree, already popular in Germany. But remember, nothing became part of Anglo-American Christmas until the English or the Americans had made it their own. Now here's how that happened with the Christmas tree. In 1848, a popular newspaper, the Illustrated London News, showed Victoria, Albert, and their family gathered around a rather scrawny tree on a Buckingham Palace tabletop. The English idolized the young Victoria, much as they would later idolize the Lady Diana, and the very next Christmas saw trees in millions of English households that had never displayed them before. The following year, in 1849, a popular women's magazine in the United States, Godey's Ladies Book, published the same picture. They retouched it a little bit. They took off Victoria's crown, and they took off Albert's sash across his chest, so they looked less like crown heads of Europe than they looked like Park Avenue society swells in New York City. Well, in 1850, millions of American households that had never had a Christmas tree before had one for the first time. Cultural transmission from German Americans was negligible. This is how we got the Christmas tree. Our next culprit is Clement C. Moore, who, despite some scholarly controversy, probably is the author of The Night Before Christmas. This 1823 poem borrowed much of its description of Santa Claus from Washington Irving. simply made up the rest, and about halfway completed our contemporary image of Santa. Next, we'll meet the guy who pretty much finished the job. Our fifth culprit, I give you Thomas Nast, a nationally revered illustrator for the magazine Harper's Weekly. Nast's cross-hatched cartoons gave us much of the iconography we associate with 19th century America. Nast invented both the Democratic donkey and the Republican elephant. In a series of cartoons that appeared in Harper's between 1862 and 1886, Nast gave Santa his definitive appearance, his North Pole headquarters, his first telephone, and much, much more. Well, for what comes next, I'm going to need a drink of water. Because the last Victorian, without whom Christmas wouldn't be what it is today, is also the least respectable. I speak as a magazine editor, and I must reveal to you that Francis Church wasn't a journalist. In fact, he was an editorial writer for a newspaper, the New York Sun. On September 21st, 1897, 8-year-old Virginia O'Hanlon wrote into the Sun asking whether there was a Santa Claus. Church responded, "Yes, Virginia," and off he went, slamming together great chunks of Christian mysticism, 19th century transcendentalism, and odd romantic touches, some of them quite odd, all yoked to a snarling distrust of scientific objectivity. I'm going to present some, pardon the expression, highlights of Yes, Virginia, and comment on them. I'm hoping that you'll be able to tell when I'm channeling Francis Church and when I'm offering my own observations. If anyone feels uncertain of that in the course of what follows, please raise your hand. I will ignore you, but you'll feel better. Yes, Virginia, there is a Santa Claus. He exists as certainly as love and generosity and devotion exist. And you know that they abound and give to your life its highest beauty and joy. In a shifty move, Church boldly declared that Santa exists and then fudged his way into a discussion of the much more abstract existences of things like love and generosity and devotion. It's all well and good, but that's not the kind of existence children attribute to Santa Claus at all. Alas, how dreary would be the world if there were no Santa Claus. It would be as dreary as if there were no Virginias. There would be no childlike faith then, no poetry, no romance to make tolerable this existence. Virginia didn't ask what was tolerable. She asked what was true. By means of a gossamer threat, what, no Virginias? Church sought to create a distraction, thereby camouflaging the thundering irrelevance of his argument. The eternal light with which childhood fills the world would be extinguished. Not believe in Santa Claus, you might as well not believe in fairies. Okay, Frank, you've got a deal. You might get your papa to hire men to watch in all the chimneys on Christmas Eve to catch Santa Claus. But even if they did not see Santa Claus coming down, what would that prove? Well, hell, Frank. If one essential element of the Santa Claus hypothesis is that Santa goes down every chimney in the world on New Year's Eve, then if he's observed not to go down even a single chimney, you have gone some distance toward disproving the hypothesis. Okay, everyone buckle your seatbelts. It gets really thick now. Nobody sees Santa Claus, but that is no sign that there is no Santa Claus. The most real things in the world are those that neither children nor men can see. Did you ever see fairies dancing on the lawn? Are we back to that? Of course not, but that's no proof that they are not there. No nobody can conceive or imagine all the wonders that there are unseen and unseeable in the world. Sure, and ignorance is strength. Me, I wonder about his obsession with fairies. With Yes, Virginia, Frank Church crafted a masterpiece of doublespeak. But in fairness, he was only trying to make a deadline. He could never have predicted that generations of parents would mismanage their children's first suspicions about Santa Claus, according to the idiotic guidelines he'd offered. After 100+ years of this, no wonder scientific illiteracy among Americans is running at better than 95%. Well, we've completed our roster of the 6 Victorians who brought Christmas back from the dead. Without this tiny clutch of Britons and Americans, without their narrowly clustered perspectives, Christmas would not be what it is today. So, what is it? Well, let's start simple. Did Christmas actually happen? Most Americans naively assume that Christmas has something to do with the birth of a child in a manger in Bethlehem in or around the year 0. Or was that the year 1? Well, it was neither. In fact, multiple lines of evidence allow us to conclude with near certainty that the Nativity never happened at all. First off, ancient history is strewn with Redeemer man-gods. Each was once believed by some faith community or other to have come to earth under miraculous circumstances and become a savior. There are just so many of these lying around the ancient world that the story of Jesus looks like a Me Too story, not like a unique account of an actually occurring event. Recognizable precursors of Jesus can be traced at least as far back as ancient Egypt, where risque legends swirled around Osiris, a god-man associated with agriculture. Osiris, it was said, was conceived during an adulterous affair between Geb, the god of the earth, and the perhaps appropriately named goddess Nut. Now, ancient Egypt snobs sometimes pronounce her name Nut, but I'm going to stick with the pronunciation that's more fun. This is a fun presentation. Okay, so Nut was a sky goddess, and she was married to the sun god Ra. Now, you know, if you take that cartoon there and you reproduce it 3 times, you have a cue card for cheerleaders? Yes, it reads Ra, Ra, Ra. Well, we know a lot about sun gods in ancient literature, and certainly it is seldom wise to cuckold a sun god. But that's what Nut had done. When Nut became pregnant with Osiris, and Ra learned that the child was not his, Ra decreed that Nut should give birth in no month and no year. Nut seemed doomed to gestate eternally, an unwelcome prospect, one presumes, even for a goddess. But that Nut, she got around. She had another lover, the god Thoth. Now, Thoth was a modern, laid-back kind of god. He was willing to do Nut a favor, even though she'd gotten pregnant by someone else. I mean, what a guy. So Thoth persuaded his buddy, the Moon, to give Thoth a tiny fraction of each passing day. And, you know, the Moon's right. It was a pretty raw deal for him. And so after a year of this, you know, every day another little chunk of time. After a year, and remember this is a year during which our dear Nut is still gestating, Thoth had accumulated 5 new days. This became Sothis, the 5-day period at the end of the Egyptian year reserved for celebrations marked by feasting, gift exchanges, and the decoration of homes and other structures with evergreen boughs. Now, does any of this sound familiar? Now, Sothis had a practical function. The Egyptians used a 30-day lunar calendar, and the 360-day lunar year would quickly get out of sync with the 365-and-a-quarter-day solar year. Sothis was their way of resynchronizing. This is kind of an important thing if you're looking for your calendar to tell you